With the arrival of Kennedy, Lucas soon began considering something that he hadn't for a very long time: making the sequel trilogy. The company was built on Star Wars. To ensure that it had a future, Lucas believed this was the best way forward. Given that Lucas was looking to retire, he didn't even bother writing the script this time. They instead brought in Michael Arndt, responsible for Little Miss Sunshine and Pixar's Toy Story 3. Lawrence Kasdan was asked to return in a purely consulting role, given his grasp of what made Star Wars work. And given how vital the presence of classic characters would be, Lucas also personally reached out to Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford about the possibility of returning. They couldn't do much with the story without knowing what characters could and couldn't appear, after all. Lucas also contacted Iger at Disney and began a 5-month negotiation. He explained his main concern, that his people knew Star Wars, that if this went forward, Disney needed to leave it in their hands. Iger understood the concern, and Pixar and Marvel had shown that Disney was trying not to interfere with the mechanics that made their acquisitions a success. But at the same time, it was made clear to Lucas that if Disney bought the company, then it had to have the final say. Lucas, who had never liked the idea of having others control his work, struggled with this thought. And that wasn't all. Disney heard about the Star Wars sequel trilogy and asked to see what he had. He said they were rough sketches. They asked to see that. He said something along the lines of, "Trust me, they're great. You're buying my ideas as much as my company. If you don't have faith in me, I'll sell to someone else." Eventually, Lucas got, in writing, a broad outline of the deal, and was willing to show a copy of the treatment to Iger and 2 other top executives, but also agreed, in writing, not to share them with anyone else. Iger said they saw the story potential, and with that, both Disney and Lucas were confident with the deal. Nevertheless, as the end of October neared and Lucas was given the contract to sign, he had trouble hiding his grief. He didn't hesitate when the moment arrived, but signing away the company that had been the center of his life for so long was no easy thing for the man. Okay. The news shocked the world, but the Marvel situation had made it palatable to fans who otherwise might have been nervous as to what Disney would do with the beloved property. And news of another Star Wars revival was met with excitement, with fans quick to assemble guidelines for the films to follow to be a success and avoid the perceived mistakes with the prequels. Meanwhile, Lucas would remain for story meetings to discuss the rules of his universe and to provide input. Like Steve Jobs, who passed away a year before this acquisition, and Ike Perlmutter, Lucas was now a huge stakeholder in Disney. Now, if you thought it was difficult enough sorting out fact from rumor from fabrication in the cloistered halls of Lucasfilm, well, now add Disney into the mix. A book by J.W. Rinzler that was made during production of Episode 7 to be a definitive behind-the-scenes look at that film was mysteriously pulled from release without explanation. With the success of his previous behind-the-scenes Star Wars books and the ever-growing popularity of the franchise, this move seems inexplicable, especially because it's been years since the book was to come out, and there is no sign that it will ever be released. There are 2 possibilities that could explain this, and forgive me if much of what follows sounds like baseless speculation. But the silence that has been deliberately created by circumstances means that all we are left to do is speculate. I don't like the thought of contributing to rumors or inventing things out of thin air, but with historical records kept safely sealed and the company tight-lipped, all we can do is examine what little we do know and attempt to fill in the blanks. The first possibility is that something in the book was legally harmful and there was disagreement on how to remedy it until it was deemed not worth pursuing at all. This seems unlikely. Resources have been invested in the production, and it seems unlikely, with 2 Star Wars films coming later, that an edited release would not have been made to at least offset the expense of the book. The only other likely explanation, then, is that there is something in the book harmful to the image of either Disney, Lucasfilm, or someone important within one of those companies. Something they don't want to let the public know about. That sounds very conspiracy theory-ish of me, I realize that, but once you eliminate rational choices, that doesn't leave a whole lot left besides conspiracy theories and incompetence. What we do know for certain is that the work Lucas had already done for Episode 7, which Iger had publicly praised, was somehow no longer viable. A not insignificant number of fans voiced views that it was Disney saving us from a repeat of the disastrous prequel trilogy. But that is only speculation, and given what little we do know, questionable. We know that the Luke Skywalker plot of Episode 8 was in fact drawn from Lucas's plans for Episode 7, but we also know that it has been significantly changed. Given some limited but nevertheless vocal fan response, it is therefore possible that the one part of Lucas's treatment is what people hated, or equally possible that they took what fans would have liked and then rescued it by turning it into something they hated. Again, we don't know. Whatever the case, it's far more likely Disney wasn't unhappy with the treatment so much as the fact that they wanted their first Star Wars film to hit certain marks. In other words, as critics frequently mentioned, to be safe, because of their plans to do far more than another trilogy, but rather to turn Star Wars into an ongoing film and television franchise. A badly received first film could doom the $4 billion deal's value right away. Whatever the reason, Lucas clearly felt he had been betrayed, which is why I feel exploring the professional experience of the man who persuaded him to make the deal is important. While this could indeed be a case of Disney saving the world from George Lucas's folly, well, even if that were true, it doesn't change the fact that Iger praised the treatment to Lucasfilm and the public, and then it was thrown away. It could be that he was off the mark completely. He is in the management side of things after all. But the decision to do so was also made before J.J. Abrams was even brought in to begin developing Episode 7. We can, however, gain some insights by looking at the completed sequel trilogy. Because the sequel trilogy, as I said, is highly controversial, in fact, I think it would be fair to say that The Last Jedi is now what The Phantom Menace used to be. Nevertheless, I want to make clear this is not meant to criticize the sequel trilogy for the sake of criticizing the sequel trilogy, but rather my criticisms are intended to hopefully lead to a place where we might gain some insights. One thing is clearly evident when we put all 3 films together, and that is there's nothing holding them together. The storylines are disjointed. Characters are marginalized or killed off from one film to the next. One movie takes away Kylo Ren's helmet and another gives it right back to him again with such speed suggesting he never should have lost it in the first place. And the final villain of the trilogy feels shoehorned in to have some kind of grand climax to it. The best we can determine is that when making Episode 7, J.J. Abrams did map out what the other 2 films should have been, and that with the blessing of management, they were thrown away. Thus, with the decision to bring him back for the 3rd film, and after the 2nd deviated substantially from where he thought it should go, the final film was left struggling to reach a satisfying conclusion. Again, I am not saying this to attack the sequel trilogy. Whether or not you like the films, it's not what I'm interested in. What it shows is that the one justifiable reason to throw away Lucas's treatment is clearly not in evidence. A superior vision. If there was an idea for a sequel trilogy that took Star Wars in a new direction, if it was something bold and exciting and would recreate Star Wars for its era, then even Lucas would have eventually seen the wisdom of it. But with no sign of a shared vision in the films and word behind the scenes that what little shared vision there was had been thrown away, then that means it's pretty unlikely that the plan was thrown out because Lucas's treatment was incompatible with the master plan of the creative forces of Lucasfilm. And so if it wasn't made by the creative forces, then that really suggests it could only have been made on the business side. And it would seem the one most likely to do so would have been Bob Iger. It seems unlikely anyone else who was not already at Lucasfilm and would have already had Lucas's ear before the acquisition to suggest changes would have been in a position to make this kind of a change without Bob Iger's approval. Not after the Marvel and Pixar deals had made abundantly clear that Disney did not intend to interfere on internal matters. But you've heard some of his history, so you can reach your own conclusion. Maybe he was just clueless management who had to be told this idea was terrible. Or maybe he said whatever it took to get Lucas to sign on the dotted line with no intention of ever following through on the idea. Now again, we don't know. Disney is willfully keeping the story out of our hands, leaving us only to sift through disparate interviews and try to separate truth from misunderstanding, from mishearings, from fabrications, from attempts to manipulate Hollywood's system for the furtherance of one's own career. As long as Disney creates an environment without facts, educated guesses are all that are left. In an interview with Charlie Rose, where Lucas was trying to explain why he walked away after that you have to move on, he allowed his mood to slip briefly when he said the Star Wars films were his children, which he cared for. When Rose interrupted saying children he sold, Lucas continued the analogy before realizing the implications of what he was saying, bitterly noting that he had sold them to white slavers. He quickly walked that back, but there was no denying Lucas was still bitter over what had happened. Yet we can gain some great insight into Lucas as well by considering his analogy for a moment of Star Wars being his children. If you think about that relationship, well, children are the legacy of their parents, aren't they? And while he has made much, Star Wars is definitely going to be the legacy of George Lucas. He birthed it. He nurtured it. He helped it grow up. He maybe got a little too overprotective at times, as parents are wont to do. That is why, despite the suggestion, there is little point in me going over the sequel trilogy with you. Even if Disney threw open the vault and let us all come in and find out what actually happened, because what would it matter? Another story of the perils of the filmmaking process? So I enjoy those too. But the relationship between Lucas and the creation that he has birthed is more than just the story of a film getting made. Like having a child, once Star Wars rolled into theaters, George Lucas's life changed forever. And every time he tried to treat it as just another movie, just another film project, he couldn't bring himself to. The day he was ready to send it off to college to take on a life of its own, he carried those same kind of mixed feelings, and his heart was broken the day that he was told, "Oh no, they don't need you anymore." Instead, Star Wars was something that he watched from afar, giving his quiet seal of approval to Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and encouraging Dave Filoni, while making the highly successful television series The Mandalorian, to do the best that he possibly could, compared by some to a corner man in a boxing ring to keep the director going until he could make the best possible work that he could. Like every proud parent, nothing was too good. And however grown up they are, you'll never stop missing them when they're gone. This journey that we have been on, of the young and unstoppable filmmaker, the conflicted and complicated empire builder, and the reclusive and heretical artist, has been about Star Wars because as he shaped it, it shaped him. And that's over now. George Lucas has his path, and Star Wars its own. And maybe, just maybe, they might come together again someday, but if so, it won't be in the same way. Now that both have needed to move on and find their own ways on separate journeys.